Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Oh, him, Steve. Okay. All powerful.
Good morning, everyone. At this time, I'll call the Crow Wing County Budget Committee for September 9th, 2021 to order. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nick to walk us through this.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. First on our agenda today is the 2021 budget amendment from Land Services, kind of continuation from the last presentation that they provided to you.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
So in front of you, hopefully you have a budget amendment that we would propose to take forward, move forward at the next county board meeting. We did send you a prioritized list of 16 projects that would be just north of $900,000 that we're asking for to do a budget amendment on. Without getting, there were some revamped numbers from the previous meeting that we had. The biggest change would be to the asphalt trail at the fire tower. When we're looking at trying to really lessen the grade of getting up to the tower on the trail, that's going to take a lot more work than we first anticipated to really get it safe. But other than that, everything else was, a few other quotes came in and dialed in some of these numbers. So just looking for if there's any questions.
One question or a couple questions, Gary, on replacing the old computers at the service counter.
Yep.
How many of those does that entail?
That's 9 all-in-ones and a total of 18 or 16 monitors.
Okay, so you're doing that all at one time, and so how are you going to spread that out when you go to replace those? We're
going to put that on a 4-year rolling replacement schedule. So we're going to have that in our budget 4 years from now to replace all of them at one time. Staff is asking that they all be the same so that one computer isn't operating one way, and you start to chase your tail when they're kind of different, at some point.
So you'll be putting money aside to replace those in the next 4 years?
Well, how that's actually going to work in our budget is we're going to start replacing, we already have a replacement schedule, so we already budget for a replacement, and these ones are going to get rolled into the replacement in 4 years, and so it's not as much setting aside money as we're just going to budget for the year that it needs to be replaced. We don't get a set aside and kind of save for it.
Okay, so you say you're going to budget for it, so it'll be on the levy at that point?
No, at that point, it'll probably still be probably 50 to 60% on non-levy funds, because it's still a heavy usage of those. We have all these services mixed, so it won't be all levy dollars in either.
But 40 to 50% could be levy?
Oh, yes, yep.
Okay. And then, just for clarity, under the Surveyor handheld equipment, just tell me what that is.
Sure. So the name brand of the devices are these very expensive Trimble devices that they use. You could say GPS on steroids is the way I look at it when I look at this stuff. And I don't know how to run them, but the current equipment that we have, I believe, is 11 years old, and it's been working, but it's starting to really be a challenge to keep updated with the new software that we have. And so this would be an upgrade that we think will last we predict probably another decade with this upgrade to the Surveyor equipment.
Okay, and is that similar for the foresters also?
That is similar with the foresters. We were looking at replacing those next year anyways, but we could fast forward that and get that done this year if you guys are okay with it.
Any other questions for Gary?
Just a question. If you could elaborate a little bit, because you and I went out for a meeting out with a constituent. So this GPS, the way it was done, 40 years ago, somebody drag a chain and say, oh, here's a rod, a rod, a rod. Can you just kind of explain what that GPS and how accurate it is, just for my benefit, I guess?
Sure. You know, we have about 4,500 county monumented section corners in Crow Wing County. And we're still going through a remonumentation project that we still anticipate to complete that. I've been here in front of you before, 6 to 7 years. Basically the marching orders are to get that done. But when we go out and establish a section corner, and then we also have quarter corners, when you're using this new technology, you could be within, 6 to 12 inches that tight versus, 4 or 5 feet with the old chain links. So what it has done is better technology has really tightened up the accuracy of the boundary lines of property in our county. And it's actually all over the place, but we are using our GIS mapping with our updated section corners to continue to basically enhance the quality of what we believe somebody owns.
So that's why it's this project of getting the monument corners all completed for the citizens of Crow Wing County is extremely important, because if a surveyor goes out there, that's what they go off of, right?
That is correct. And if there's a disagreement, they look for the county surveyor to step in and figure out where they believe the line is, and that's what we usually go with, unless there's a court order. And so the benefit to pretty much everybody in our community is accuracy, in that when surveyors go out, the data is really good and there is no discrepancy, even though there can be. I always was under the impression that surveys were, there's only one way to do one. Well, for the most part, they all have the same standard, but they can vary a little bit depending on the evidence that they find, in the historic records over the years.
So what you go by is this legal description, like the southeast corner of the south, whatever. That's what you go by. And like this meeting that we had the other day, if I have something and it says deeded acres, that from 50 years ago, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the correct number.
No, it could or it could not be. As far as that's what your deed says, what you're actually going to pay tax on is what the GIS and our better technology says, if that kind of makes sense. So
right.
Somebody could have a northwest quarter of the northwest quarter, let's say, and that's 40 acres. And our GIS mapping says 39.85, depending on, you're looking at the curvature here a little bit, and they didn't take, they'd have these correctional 40s, that's how they'd try to, fix that the old way. Now we do it, it's really live on every single property, and it can be kind of confusing for a customer if they're like, well, my deed says 40, but you're saying that you're only taxing me for 39.85 or 39. We have adopted that. We use the best technology that's out there, and currently it's aerial photography with parcel mapping, with GPS surveyed, and it's kind of a mixed match. Just not everything has been surveyed in the county. Everything's been surveyed, but it's not been, some stuff is really old, like from the teens and the 20s. And then you have these surveys that would have been done, let's say this year, or a new plat done this year, and you're making it all work. So it's kind of a mix mash, but everything has to be tied back to the county monumented section corners. That's why it's so important.
Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Does that cause a lot of problems, Gary, when somebody comes to sell and they think their line is 6 feet over there and it's actually back
It
here?
actually, it does cause problems. Unfortunately, it's going to be like that for the foreseeable future, because that's just how it is. There is inaccuracies when you're trying to take something that's, we believe, is a better product and make it work with what somebody thinks they owned for 50 years. And if it isn't the same, yeah, there's issues, but we work through them.
Mr. Chair, I also had another friend of mine, this was a different deal, where he's got some property in St. Matthias Township and bought it many years ago. It's hunting land, it's way back. There's an old cemetery close by it, but there was a fence line in, and he found out when the property was sold next to him, where he thought the property line was, where the fence line was. No, it was 50 feet difference.
Yep.
So he lost 50 feet. You know, you could say, well, that's where the line has been. I don't think, I know if I was buying it on the other side, I'd be mad as hell if you said, well, the fence line's been there, so now this is where the line's gonna be. No, I think the line needs to be where it is.
Yep.
You know, so it's just, I tell you, that's why this monument, doing these monuments is extremely important, and I see that more because of this meeting that we had the other day. So I appreciate Gary, thanks.
Any other discussion items for Gary or questions regarding his request? Nothing else, Gary?
No, I think I'm in favor of moving forward with it.
Yep. So this will be on your board agenda for next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Next up on our list, we have Carolyn White from Community Services. She is the business manager with Community Services. She has been with us since 2017, but physically in this role for a whopping 3 months now. So she is going to do the best she can to give you a good update on what Community Services looks like. We did bring some additional support, so if you do have questions, we can definitely help answer any questions you have. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Carolyn here.
Welcome, Carolyn. I know this is your first time in front of us. I want to remind you to speak loud so that we understand exactly what you're saying, so we would appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Nice to meet all of you officially. I know I've met a couple of you, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. So this is just our update as of year to date, as of August 31st. We're just going to kind of go through some things here. Where's my mouse?
Excuse me.
Thank you. Okay, so the first slide here is our community services revenue, and we are way ahead of revenue. Well, not way ahead, but we are at 105.3% of budget at this time. There are several key factors that are feeding into that, which are our COVID grants. We've received several COVID grants that are both state and federal funded that we've applied to expenses and staff time. So we've tracked our staff time and all the expenses that we've had related to COVID and gotten reimbursed for all of that additional expense. Our state improvement or state health improvement program, or SHIP, is often looks odd because it's not a calendar grant year. It's 11/1 to 10/30. So it kind of tends to overlap. As we submit our claims, they sometimes come in the following year. So those numbers can look a little bit skewed at this point. So it looks like we're ahead, but basically we spend the money, we get reimbursed for it, kind of an in and out situation. We have received our emergency shelter award this year, which you all are aware of, and we use that to cover the expenses of the shelter itself and the staff time that our staff used to serve those community members while they were in the shelter due to COVID-19. We have access services revenues on both state and federal side are much lower than expected this year in 2021. Mostly, of course, due to COVID. Community members are getting medical services they need via the internet and telephone, so we're not doing as much transporting of people between facilities to get them to their appointments. And I just want to make a note that due to the timing of the month end not quite closed on our books, that the revenue numbers or some of the revenue that came in August will actually pull into the September report. So the numbers are as good as we had them, you know, at the time of pulling this report.
Quick question for you, Carolyn.
Sure.
On the SHIP grant, year over year, are we seeing that it's pretty kind of level in terms of the reimbursements that fall in the following year? So
It is.
It's not like we got a big bump because of 2020 into the current year, 2021?
There was a little bit of a time where we were behind in our invoicing because we work with Essentia to, when they provide services, we pay some of their staff costs, and they wanted to change their contract a little bit. And so while we were doing that, there was a couple of months where we submitted invoices at the same time. So that does create a bump sometimes. But the grant itself is consistent from year to year as far as the amount of funding that we receive.
Okay.
And it's been right on budget.
Very good, thank you.
Our, excuse me, go to the next slide.
That takes a little bit for that to catch
Oh, okay. All right, apparently I don't know how to drive this very well, sorry. Okay, so our expenses are currently at 89.99% of budget, which is great news. Several key factors that have affected that are personnel costs, like most other departments. It takes a bit longer to bring new people on board, and sometimes also it can be challenging to find qualified or experienced staff to hire for some of our positions. So it just takes longer, a little bit of a gap there. Our out-of-home placement and state-operated services is something we're always looking at. The trends are continuing for now to be on the good side, I guess you could say. We're not really sure at this time how school and COVID will affect our out-of-home placement numbers since the school year is just getting started, but we'll kind of get a better picture of that as time goes on here. And then we're also looking at the removal of some waivers and how that may impact some of our services. And of course, it's too early to tell, but we monitor those programs very closely, make sure we're on track and on target.
Couple questions for you there.
Sure.
Personnel, how many positions are you down currently?
At this point, we are looking for a WIC coordinator.
Okay,
Do you know exactly?
The WIC specialists were down, and we had that open for 3 months. And then one support staff position is open as well.
so a couple positions. Okay,
And we had a little bit of a gap too with our accounting team, me moving into this position, hiring to replace myself, and then we had another team member that resigned as well, and she was recently replaced, so we had a few
Okay.
there too.
and then out-of-home placement, I've noticed is down extremely. I mean, a ton, almost 1.2 million, is that correct?
We expect to continue to trend at a level pace with 2020. So we'll come in similar to the 2020 budget for expenses and revenue.
Okay, that's my questions for this page.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have corrections placements. There are a number of factors there as to why the numbers are down. Specifically in the juvenile area, our team has focused heavily on utilizing the least restrictive alternatives to placements, which might be relative placements that are at no cost. Not used to wearing these glasses, sorry. And the team uses other methods like foster placements or group homes versus residential placements that can cost more. They really just use different resources to try and keep the cost down the best that they can. And then for services and charges, I think probably the same with every department. Our mileage, our travel expenses, our training costs are all down quite a bit this year. People are start traveling for trainings and they're being held online virtually.
Question there, and maybe this is more for Kara, but overall, if we're not engaging in these training sessions, are our staff losing the ability to, I'm not sure, understand what's possible out there? And I don't know how to word that question, but
Like as far as programs go and what their role is and things, like that kind of training?
Well, I would think Kara's right behind you, so she.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Chair, County Board, we've been really fortunate in that a number of the trainings have been offered online. And so we're still able to receive the training that we need. We just do it in a different way.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
So as far as our 2021 financial outlook and some program financial updates, our revenue will continue to increase as we're expecting more funding to come from MDH. Public aid assistance has a large variance at this time. Part of it's due to extended employment. There's just less workers in our program. We don't have that many workers this year, probably due to COVID, most likely. Transportation services, again, at the beginning of the year, most people were doing their appointments via Zoom, or procedures were canceled, or postponed, so our clients didn't really need to use this pot of money to go back and forth to their appointments. And the crisis response grant is something that kind of fluctuates too. We're reimbursed quarterly after we request it from the state, and so at this time we're waiting on some invoices to be submitted to us so we can pay them and get reimbursed. So those numbers just look a little bit out of whack right at this moment. For children's welfare, targeted case management, and adult mental health, targeted case management, we expected an increase in 2021, and it's expected to hold steady throughout the year. Both of these programs are a real team effort. Our staff is well trained into what they need to do to draw down the funding, and our team leads are very involved with overseeing the programs. Our accounting staff tracks and reworks all the claims and the rejected claims, work closely with the team leads and the supervisors to make sure we're getting as much reimbursement as we can in those programs. And recently we held some meetings and trainings between the various teams to make sure everybody understands their role and we can make that flow effectively. And then our public health team implemented a new program. It's new to us program this year, evidence-based home visiting program. You might see it called EBHV. The goal of that program is to support families to parent effectively despite their difficulties that they face day to day. And we started it on April 1st, and this was not part of the 2021 budget presented last year. It is just brand new. So it's an additional pot of money, but we haven't added any staff to implement this grant. Our public health nurses have shifted their time to this program from kind of some of the other areas they were spending their time. And the staff time and expenses are all covered 100% by that grant.
Question on that, and again, for Kara, is that going well? Is that turning out the results or Kara, the results that you expected?
Good morning. So as Carolyn mentioned, the grant supplanted the work that we were already doing in the family home visiting program and gave us more tools and more training in our toolbox when working with families. So it's thinking of expanding our training and our curriculum in what we're presenting and helping the parents with. So,
Okay, and
definitely.
Have you done any analysis to preliminary kind of determine if you're getting what you were expecting out of that grant?
Yeah, so that will be part of, the outcome analysis of the success of the families or the increasing their skills as a parent will be part of the evaluation for our grant. We will report that back to MDH, and then we can present that information as well to the board.
I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The final slide, does anybody have any questions about anything?
Anyone have questions for Carolyn? I think you covered all my questions.
Good.
Congratulations on your first visit to the,
Thank you.
whatever we call the pit down there.
Is this the pit?
But I appreciate it. You
All
did a
right.
nice job. Your voice was easy to hear, so I appreciate
Good.
that, but
Thank
thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you so much.
I was told that we're supposed to drag this out till 11. I don't know how we're going to do that. Okay, let's pull up the next piece here. Next on our list is the financial status update. I'll place that. Through the end of August. Starting out with general fund, we continue to have revenues exceed what we have budgeted through this point in the year. We still see the tax impact from last year rolling forward, helping us in this area. We also had strong tax collections in July like we talked last month, which was only 2 weeks ago now, so a lot of repeats when we go through this. Overall, it's a very positive position for us to be, and you see that in our cash position as well. On the expense side, we continue to trend under budget as a whole for general fund. This is primarily due to personnel services keeping us under that area, which is across the entire organization right now. As we see that struggle to replace staff, we get the savings from nobody being in that position for that time frame. Jumping in Sheriff's Department, we are under on our revenues. We're at 94.88%. Federal grants are under our expected budget by $86,166. We still have that emergency management grant that is hanging out there from May that still hasn't been settled back to us. They are still saying August or September, but at this point, who knows when it'll actually come. We're at the will or whim of the federal government for when that reimbursement comes. We did also submit for a bomb squad expense reimbursement this last month. That should be coming here shortly as well, which should get us back on track. State grants are now back within budget, so we saw them go out of budget, back in budget, now we're back out and back in again. So we're back where we need to be there. We still see our license and permits continue to outpace, with gun permits being way up over what we anticipated. Positive for us to be getting additional money, so a good thing. Charges for services are under expected budget to this point. We still see the courts impacting that with less booking fees and civil process fees being down without being able to go out and serve papers. There's no revenue to be made. On the expense side, the Sheriff's Office is at 92.21% of budget. Personnel services is the primary driver to this. It's $837,000 there. Services and charges continue to be under budget as well. We see reduced expenses still within the jail from inmate meals and other operational expenses related to that. Supplies and materials are also under budget. Again, a lot of this comes down to not having to invest as much into our buildings at this point in time, so we see a lot more reduction in that. Computers and PCs at one point were under budget. They're finally starting to get some of those in, so that is starting to come up to what they have budgeted for the year. Land services revenue continues to outpace greatly. We are at 139.46%. This is still permits and charges for services outpacing with the markets the way they are for homes. We're seeing a lot more documents come through, a lot more things being processed, drives up our revenues on that side. On the expense side, we are pretty close to right on budget. We're at 99.15% of budget. Personnel continues to be under budget here as well, $68,000. But we do see a couple areas that are over budget, primarily services and charges. That's $33,000 over. This is still related to that enforcement action that we've had to put money into to complete. Governance services, we are at 115.45% here. The primary driver to that being over budget, which it's revenues, it's a good thing, is the attorney's office and their charges for services. They continue to see increased amounts that they can charge, and that's reflected here. On the expense side, 100.41%, that's pretty dang good. So that means everybody's staying on pace with where we need to be. Personnel is staying up to date, so we're doing good here. Administrative services, revenues are at 107.05%. It's above our expected revenues by $16,737. On-sale liquor license fees, like we've talked every month, they're spread over 12 months, something to look at correcting next year so we don't have to talk about it every single month. On the expense side, we are at 92.07. Our supplies and materials are under budget with the reduction in amount of water and sewer and gas that's being used with staffing changes. We continue to see savings here. As staff carts coming back into play and we start seeing increases in our fuel costs, I anticipate this will get closer towards a level budget, but I don't know that we'll eat up a whole 118,000. We did secure a position in futures for the gas to try and help us mitigate the risk of high prices in gas. We only bought, I think we're at 25% right now? Yes. 25% of our fuel for the coming months in advance to try and secure a lower rate, which is at this point looking like it's going to pay off because gas prices continue to increase pretty drastically to significant highs over the last 5 to 8 years. So we're trying our best to mitigate any financial risk that we face with that. On the services and charges side, we are also below expected budget to point. This is where our utilities play into the picture. And then our building and maintenance supplies are under as well. Out of general fund over to highway fund, revenues are at 113.12% of budget. State aid revenue is above budget still, as the federal side is under budget. This is all timing on the projects, getting that money in advance from state and waiting to be reimbursed from the Fed. Local option sales tax, we continue to see that outperform. We're just over $1 million over what we anticipated for the year to date. And I expect that to be a significant increase in the coming months here. Just watching traffic over Labor Day weekend, I think there'll be some significant jumps yet, that we will see this much, much higher yet. On the expense side, we are at 114.67% of budget. Personnel services is under still by 127,000. This is kind of steadying out now. They are pretty much back to full capacity on staffing, so this should maintain about this level for the rest of the year. Vacancies still driving that. Services and charges are over budget by just over $2 million. This is due to the timing of contract payments, as well as there's reimbursable local shares that we don't budget for. So if Rob goes out and does a project and a local partner wants to do a side street or something like that, we allow them to go under our contract to do that. We incur that expense up front, and then we bill them for that reimbursement after the fact. So that plays into this as well. There's, I think, almost $500,000 worth of local options or local participation that needs to be reimbursed yet. Supplies and materials continue to be under budget, just like every other month. It's still the last winter having a positive impact on us on that budget line item. Community services, we went through this pretty well in detail. Are there any questions, or I can kind of skip through this one because Carolyn covered it very well, I think. So revenues are over budget, expenses under budget to date. Unrestricted cash flows, we still find ourselves in a better position than we have been in the past. You do see a significant drop from July to August. We did shift the $6.9 million that we received in ARPA funds out of our general fund over to a restricted fund and put it into the trust account. It's its own standalone account to try and get some decent interest returns off of those funds. If we left it in the money market savings account, we're still at that 0.02 to 0.04%. Over in the trust, we have the potential of getting up to about 2%. The interest we earn off those funds do not fall under the guidance for ARPA. Those are funds that we have the freedom to use as we feel fit. So we want to try and maximize the return we're going to get. So we shifted that out. And that's what the major drop is from July to August. Otherwise, we're in a much better position than we have been. We still do have about $4 to $5 million worth of funds that are sitting in here that were previously in CDs that were invested in the past that we don't have invested right now, so they sit as unrestricted cash. We're still researching our options of what we can do with those funds. We may move those to a separate trust fund as well to try and get a little more returns out of that as well. So you may see this decline, but it's us shifting the money to make sure we get the best returns on the cash we have.
So Nick, the July black line on the graph is skewed by the 6.9, correct?
Yes. That the entire amount that we got from ARPA was placed into general fund.
So without that, we would have been looking at the 15 million also. So going from June to July then would look a little different
Yep.
if we hadn't.
Yep, and
dollars.
last year with CARES Act coming in, that's what helped us in July last year as well. We saw that significant jump, and then that shifted out into a restricted account once we figured out how we were going to manage those funds.
Okay.
So if you dropped both of those out, we're still ahead of where we were back in 2019. So we're still in a better position. We're still not where we need to be when we look at the fund balance side, but we're better off than we have been in the past.
Right.
First assessment district, realistically, very little change from last month. We continue to be over budget in revenues. The property taxes collections were above what we anticipated for July. That had a positive impact on us, as well as the state gas tax being spread over those 12 months. On the expense side, we're starting to come back towards in line with where we need to be. We're at 108.04%. Contractor construction fees are over budget by $59,000. Project timing is the primary driver behind that. And then our other areas are back in line. And then the interfund transfer out to highway has a negative impact on us in our expenses as we haven't budgeted for that in the past. We will be looking at trying to budget that for 2022 to make sure that's accounted for. Second assessment district, similar to first assessment district, not much change from last month. Primary driver being property taxes, collections being above what expected. As an example, this looks like a massive variance. The property taxes were $3,672 higher than what we anticipated. So it looks huge, but we're talking much smaller dollar amounts, so it's not as big of an impact. On the expense side, we are at 92.72. Contracted maintenance fees are under budget by $12,691. And then we have that same as the FAD, the negative impact of highways costs directly associated to the SAD being charged. That was not a budgeted line within the system. Any questions on any of our financial status updates?
Questions? Not seeing or hearing anything from the board.
Excellent. Moving on to our next item, which additional business. I did provide the preliminary levy resolution to all of you. We're just looking to see if there's any questions on anything that's in there. Otherwise, that is what will be coming before you next Tuesday at the board meeting.
So to be clear, this is 3.99 or 98 or something, so
3.99.
3.99, okay. Any
Yeah, I
questions?
do have a question there. I don't know, this is unrelated to this, I guess it's additional business. When you were saying that we're moving money around, it made me think, and I'm getting forgetful in my older age. So I know when a few years back, and maybe it's for you or Deb, but we started developing a lot more policies for you in your department to follow. For example, if we were going to go and bond, we had no policies. Deb's shaking her head yes. And then we developed a policy because that was one of the things that the bond houses, I think, wanted us to have. But I thought when we did those policies, we were either going to have those come back to the budget committee for review every year or every other year or something. I don't remember us having any reviews at all this year. Maybe we have, and I guess I can't remember, but I just want to make sure that we're doing the reviews and you're looking over the policies to see if there's anything that needs to be adjusted. You know, if you're moving that money around, I want to just make sure that you're following the policies, or if it's not working for you, you can come to us and adjust the policy. Does that make
Yep.
sense?
And we bring about 3 to 4 to you each year. We usually bring that towards the end of the year. So last ones that we reviewed were in November of last year.
Okay.
And we'll be coming to you either in October or November again this year with another 3 to 4 of the policies to review.
There you go. Okay. Way ahead of me.
Try to be sometimes.
Anything else?
Anything else on preliminary levy? Okay,
Questions on the preliminary levy?
one other item.
Pardon me? Identify yourself and your address, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Tim Hool, County Administrator. I just want to point out what's all in here. You have the preliminary levy for Crow Wing County. You have the preliminary levy for the first assessment, the second assessment district. County HRA is also in there. You would be approving the benefit plans and the pay matrix for 2022. The elected official salaries are in there that have been previously discussed. The per diem rates for citizen advisory committees is in the resolution, not proposed to change. If you have any interest in that, you could discuss that. The per diem rate for the planning commission, also proposed in the resolution, no change. Sets the budget and levy meeting for December 14th, and that we may adjust them between now and December 28th. So I just want to make sure there's a lot in here.
Go ahead.
So we can't go up. Once we vote on this, we can't go up, but we can go down.
That is correct,
If
yes.
something happens. And then what about the tour today, the remodel
CIP.
CIP? That's not in here.
The design work is in the CIP, and if you pull that, you can have a conversation about, okay, that will create a budget hole. I do think we're underfunding the CIP, and we've struggled the last couple of years with supply chain issues. When those are cured, we have some pent-up needs, like roofs that are getting older and older. So I do think that it will create a budget hole. I would use that budget hole to build some CIP fund balance, and so it's built in.
I didn't understand that at all. You didn't answer my question. So is the remodel, if I voted yes, which I don't, and I'm sorry, Kara, I mean, you and I don't agree all the time, but I don't agree with the remodel, and I'm not voting for the remodel, and I'm not voting for the entire budget with the remodel in here. So I'm asking you, is that in here? Because I want to make.
No,
Not the
this is
cost of
just
construction.
establishing the preliminary levy. This
Okay.
isn't approving our budget or our CIP budget.
Right.
Neither one is in this. That is when we do the final is when you'll approve those aspects.
In the CIP plan that you have, there is design work, but not construction work. So it would be the architectural work. So there is some costs associated with both that project and this project in the CIP. That is not being approved as part of this resolution. We don't do that till December.
How much is the planning and, well, it would be kind of planning and design money. So how much would that be? Do you know off the,
I think it was 600,000, is that right?
oh God.
The design work for community services total would be about $180,000. The ask, I think, for next year, the way Nick has it broke down, is $149,000. That gets us up to bid. So that would be the design, all the AIA documents, everything that the architectural firm would need to do to get us ready to go out for bid. So that's for the community services. Across the street, for the courtroom build-out is about $65,000 for the same part of the process. So,
Thank you.
yes.
If you decide not to pursue one or the other of those projects, those funds would come out of the plan. And I'm saying that's a budget hole, and I'm recommending that you let that translate into fund balance growth within the CIP,
Oh, okay, now it makes sense.
That's what I'm
understand
saying.
what you're saying. Okay.
okay?
Thank
You're
you.
not approving the CIP in this resolution. That does not happen till December. So no one's authorized to go do anything.
Okay, all right.
You're comfortable now?
Yeah, I'm okay now.
Okay, all right. I want to remind everyone, you know, we meet only for the first time on the second, I'm sorry,
Can I just add one thing on what Administrator Hool was saying? In the levy, you have all the preliminary stuff for all of the FAD, the SAD, and the county. The HRA levy is actually the final levy approval for the HRA, as that one does not require preliminary approval and final approval. So if you pass the resolution with that language in it next week, that will be the final levy for the HRA.
okay,
Just a
good
clarification.
to clarify.
Oh, Deb, before you leave, so I guess just a question, so why, let's say I didn't agree with the HRA and putting that money into that, I never did agree with that, putting that money into the, what would you call it?
Housing Trust Fund?
Yeah, the trust fund. So why don't we have it all separated out, like the SAD and the FAD and the county budget and then the HRA? Why do we have it all rolled into one resolution?
That's his value.
Okay,
It is in the interest of time. Very simply put, we have historically always done it this way. That does not mean we need to keep doing it. But think about every one of the things that I pulled out of there. You can have a separate vote for each one of those. And there's about 12 of them in there. So it is in the interest of time and expediency to bundle the things that we do every year as part of the budget process into our budget and levy resolutions.
it kind of reminds me of my legislative years when we'd go for 4 months and we'd have meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and we'd think, oh boy, we're really getting a lot of work done. But at the end of the day, out of 201 legislators, there was about 4 people that were making the decision, and they'd roll it all into one gigantic thing, and then we either had to vote yes or no on it. You know,
And
so,
similarities, yes. Differences, yes. The difference being, all 5 of you are involved in that
Right.
deliberation here, where I think your description of what occurs at the legislature is accurate.
Yeah.
It is a few people who make the decisions in the final hours. We don't do that. And you see there's 12 things in this resolution that you could put off until later in the year. We don't do that. We tend to deal with the issues as they're coming forward. If you have an interest in picking something off of this or any other resolution that's brought forward, you can always make a motion to amend the resolution to whatever it is you want it to say. Get a second,
And
then you debate just that amendment.
yeah. And I will say that I never, in the 8 budgets before, I don't know that I agree with 100%. I certainly don't agree with 100%. So I have to decide, am I going to vote no on 90% of what I agree with, or am I going to vote for it? You know, so it's just, I don't know. It's just, I wish that people understood more, or I wish people were more involved in the process of understanding how this whole thing works.
It's give and take between 5 people who do not see things identically.
No.
And the citizens sent you here to wrestle with these issues and try to figure them out on their behalf. It's a messy business. I don't agree with everything. I've never agreed with everything in every county budget that I've done over 27 years. There's too much. There are things I would disagree with. You do have to compromise in this business. It is not a dirty word. It is a good thing. People with disparate views have to figure out how we're going to run this government. That's your job.
And I will say one other thing, if that's okay. I wish we could set a 5-year or even a 10-year plan for Crow Wing County and say, this is where we're going to be, and this is exactly where the numbers are going to be. I wish it worked that way.
It's tough.
But it doesn't work that way. I've realized that because it's everything. It's the economy, it's the virus, it's everything, and it's almost a year by year, it's almost by a month deal of up and down, and it's just,
do plan.
It's a complicated deal.
Yeah, we do plan because I think that that is appropriate and necessary because most of the time you won't get knocked off your plan. You have to be prepared for those occasions when your plan is going to get thrown out the window. We recently experienced that. Thank you.
So my final thing that I started to talk about was, we meet the second Tuesday of each month, and there's always things that I like to identify that happen during a month, so usually I'm a couple weeks late. In September, I just want to acknowledge is National Suicide Prevention Month, and we all have a responsibility to address people that we think may be struggling or ourselves who may be struggling, and that we should not be afraid to address that issue with each other. It's extremely important, and we have to remember the people that have experienced suicide in their lives and acknowledge that, times are tough for them, and it might be a particular time of year, it might be a song, it could be anything that causes them to experience that bad event again. But more importantly is that tomorrow is World Suicide Prevention Day, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to bring that out. And that's a time, again, to remember the people that have been impacted by suicide and to raise that awareness. So any chance we have to focus on efforts and directing treatment to those who need it most, we should take advantage of that. Then the second thing is September's National Recovery Month, and this is for the people that experience addiction, and that everyone's journey in that issue is different. But the overriding statement that I want to make is that we are all in this together. We are all part of the society that has been created by us, and only us, or we, will be able to address that issue. So when we can help someone, we need to step up and do what's right. And with that,
I do.
Administrator
I do have one
Houle.
more item as well.
Go ahead. Administrator, go ahead.
Can I say something? Well, first of all, there's times when I poke fun at you, and as you know.
Yeah.
But I will say, I appreciate you bringing this up today. And it makes me think of, my 12 years as a contractee with Crow Wing County and doing all the medical examiner calls, which was a drowning, a car accident, a suicide, multiple suicides over my 12 years. And I used to think to myself, well, this doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all. But it's funny how it's been many years since I've been doing it. And if I'm driving through an intersection where somebody had gotten killed, that's the first thing that comes into my head. And I know where people were killed or committed suicide, and it's still, I don't know, I think it does bother me. I like to say that it doesn't bother me, but I can still see these people. And it's a scary thing, and I know that, when I pick these people up and I bring them down to the medical examiner's office, there was times I can remember that I wish I could have talked to those people and said, this is not the way to go.
Right.
And I just wish, if you know somebody that's having some issues, please talk to them. And because it is it's an awful thing.
You also saw the effect on the family.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Administrator Houle?
We have one more item for you. You may recall at the last Budget Committee meeting, you had asked questions about our fleet policy and whether or not we were replacing squads and at what point, and whether we're, basically following the policy. Joe Luxick is here today to answer any questions that you may have about that. I think it was about, are we replacing vehicles on a set schedule, and if so, what does the policy call for?
Joe, welcome.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Do we have questions for?
Can you maybe go over, Joe, what is the replacement schedule for the different types of vehicles that we have?
I can. What we typically do is our policy states that for pool vehicles are roughly 10 years, 100 or 175,000 miles. Our specialty vehicles, which include emergency response vehicles, which is 3 years or 125,000. The emergency response unmarked vehicles, which is 5 years or 150,000 miles. And non-emergency response vehicles is 10 years or 175,000. Then we get into our on-road equipment, which is typically 15 years or 175,000 miles. Our off-road equipment, over 150 horsepower, which is 15 years or 6,000 hours. And then we get into off-road equipment under 150,000 or 150 horsepower, is 15 years or 3,000 hours. Then we get down into some specialty items as far as watercraft or patrol boats. We look at 8 years or 1,500 hours. Our specialty boats, which are 10 years or 2,000 hours. Flat bottom boats, 10 years or 2,000 hours. Our PWCs or personal watercrafts, which is 8 years, 1,500 hours. And then into ATVs, which is 10 years or dependent on mechanical issues. Typically when those items, those ATVs sit for a while, which they don't get used a lot, 10 years, or they start having issues with fuel issues, mechanical problems, not having run for a while and that kind of thing. So that is our overall replacement schedule for our vehicles and equipment. Then you also factor in if there's issues with vehicles within that time frame. We look at reliability, safety issues with them, and just look at the overall condition of the vehicles and equipment to see if we move it forward in the plan, if that makes sense or not. It's still a judgment call, but we still are having those discussions, going through and asking, does it make sense to move it forward? So.
All the ones that you make that decision based on hours of operation?
Yep.
Do they all have a unit that tracks those hours so you know when it hits the 150 hours or 1,500, whatever the number was?
Yep. They all have hour meters on them that record time. And then we also have some GPS tracking that follows that also and gives us information back on that.
Questions?
For the vehicles that we replace in 3 years or 5 years, if they're still useful life, what do we do with those vehicles?
We repurpose those vehicles back into the county and other departments. Typically, the first department that receives those vehicles is usually community services, and then followed by facilities and highway department. Depending on condition and mileage on those particular vehicles too, that determines which department they kind of go into. If one's at really high miles, low in age, I'll typically keep that out of community services and move it into the highway or facilities department. We don't want to put a high mile or age vehicle into community services when we're transporting clients and personnel. So I try to regulate that as best I can and keep that in mind when I'm making those moves and repurposing. So
I guess I've got a question. So, as you drive by Mills Ford or Mills GM or Donlingers or anybody, they don't have any vehicles.
Nope.
Are we able to even get any vehicles, or what's the back or the timeline on that, or what's?
We are capable, but they have been delayed this last year, almost 2 years now. We've been in a delay process, basically, just because of timing, everything that's going on. But we are still able to get vehicles. Typically right now, when we first were getting them was about 120 days from time of order to time of build and time that we receive them. Right now, we're typically about 6 months out. By the time we order and receive that vehicle, it's about a 6-month process right now. It could get longer, but some things are delaying that. Chips, specialized chips that go into the vehicles, that's been a big delay for GM. just some things like that.
Where do the vehicles come from? I mean, are we buying them from a dealership, or are we buying them just directly from, if it's a Ford, are we buying them from Ford, or how does that work?
They are recognized, the dealerships are recognized by a state contract. We purchase off the state contract and we piggyback off of that. There's typically certain dealers that are recognized through the state. They do a bid process themselves to be able to get the contract. And then we go to those certain dealers to order those vehicles from them. We can go to other dealerships and order vehicles from them too, but we have to have a three bid process at that point versus state contract. They've already bid the process, and we don't have to go out for those extra bids to determine whether that's the cheapest vehicle or not, or the best vehicle for us.
And then as far as any survey, I know we got mechanics, but we don't, if it's under warranty, I would assume that we take it to the dealership, correct?
Yep. Warranty items still go back to the dealership, yes. Yep.
Okay.
So one quick question on maintenance, and has to do with tires. Commissioner Breckler and I were out at the landfill the other day, and Gary indicated to us that their trucks out there drive on the gravel roads within the landfill area, and that their tires don't get what would be the normal life out of them. They tend to wear out quicker just because of driving over the rocks and that. Are you seeing an increase of tire maintenance for our patrol cars because of the robust chip sealing that Mr. Bray does on our county? I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that question.
I have not seen that yet.
I got a quick question. I think on our I don't have it with me, but on the list of capital projects, there were like 7 cars, maybe 5 patrol cars and 2 others under the sheriff's request. How many total deputy cars do we have?
I believe there's about 26.
26, and and again, I don't have it listed, but I thought there were like 5 patrol cars on that list. Do you recall?
Yep, I believe we do for 22. I believe we have 5 patrol cars being replaced.
And then, so they meet what criteria? I didn't catch the
The emergency response vehicles is 3 years or 125,000 miles.
3 years or 120, and they all meet that, I'm assuming?
Yep, they do. Yep.
So what is the typical rotation? How many, I just don't recall 5 in a year that we've done, but maybe I missed that. But
Typically, we're about 4 to 5 squads per year.
we are.
Yep, depending on mileage. Each year, that mileage range fluctuates quite a bit. So we may have planned for like 22, we may have planned 5 vehicles, but when 22 actually comes around, we may have 6 that fall into that criteria. So it's really we have to play kind of a game with mileage because we don't know when exactly. It's all based off how many miles that patrol officer drives in a year. We typically range about 35,000 all the way down to about 15,000 miles, depending on the driver, on their route, what they do with that vehicle, how they patrol. And that's a pretty wide range of mileage. So we may have one vehicle that is an older vehicle, more than 3 years old, that has less miles on it than a 2-year-old vehicle that has, say, like the transport vehicles, they collect 50 to 60,000 miles a year. So those are getting replaced more often versus the patrol squads that are typically 4 or 5 year vehicle.
So we use the patrol car to transfer?
Yep.
Okay.
We can, but typically the transports usually do the transfers. They're the ones with the high miles that put on 50 to 60 a year because they're typically going out of state a lot of times.
And then I thought, again, I'm going just off of some memory here, which
I do have
thought
it
there was a
pulled up for you.
one for the drug task force or something, if a new vehicle.
Yep, laded vehicle.
Do they currently have one?
Yep.
That is used?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that criteria then for, that's different than a patrol car?
It is, but it still falls under, I believe, the emergency response unmarked vehicle because it's a drug enforcement vehicle. So I would take that as it's an emergency response vehicle.
So they could participate in the high speed?
They can, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So is that the 3-year?
That is a 5-year, 150,000 miles.
5-year, 150.
Yep. And that vehicle, that particular related vehicle is a 2012 right now.
Okay.
And that was repurposed from the sheriff's department to the related department about 2 years ago.
And then every one of them vehicles will then go someplace within the organization, is
Yep.
that? Okay.
Yep, once they're repurposed, we typically put those somewhere else and get rid of the vehicles that have older age on them and higher miles, and try to cull those out of the system for efficiency and just to keep a better vehicle on hand versus that older stuff that is deteriorating, rusting, having issues.
So we get the full life basically out of any vehicle
yeah.
purchased?
Yep, we're trying to get as much as we can, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would like all the oldest ones and the rustiest ones to go to Land Services for Gary, because when he rolls out there, when our customers see it, I want them to realize that Gary, Gary knows what I'm talking about. But I did have another question. This wasn't a question, this is more of a comment, and I think everybody, you know what this reminds me of, and Tim will laugh about this, it reminds me of Steve Wenzel, because Steve Wenzel used to buy old patrol cars, and I know that he had one that was over 400,000 miles, and I think he hit a whole herd of deer and wrecked the car, but he'd drive those things for 400,000 or 500,000 miles, these old squad cars, so they last. Huh? He actually bought a new car, believe it or not, at Mills Ford. Yeah, believe it or not, yeah.
Any other questions for Joe? Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you, Commissioners.
Is that all?
That's
That was
it.
our last one.
Okay, so I have a question.
Apparently, we're
feel-
not done.
Oh, no. I would like to, even though, Kara, I'm opposed to I want to go on
Sure.
the tour, but I do not want to wait until 11 o'clock. Is there any way that we can split us up with different groups and we could go now, or are we out of compliance or do we have to wait till 11 o'clock, is my question.
We can do ours now if you're interested. We're ready to go.
Tim, I'm asking you.
We're not asking.
Huh?
We advertised it for 11 a.m., and I know that judges and some court personnel were going to go on it with you.
Oh.
So Don, can you speak to that? Do you know if others are going?
I spoke to court administration this morning, and all the judges are currently in court. Alice has meetings all morning, but when we're headed to this building, I'm gonna text her and she'll join us if she can. I don't think any of the bench will be able to join today, however.
I can't even hear him. What's going on with his?
He doesn't believe the bench will be able to join because they're all in court, but he'll text when we are over towards their building to make sure if somebody can join, they can.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh, there you go.
Absolutely.
There you go. You look like you're on JJY.
Yeah, I have gremlins in my computer, so now I have to use a headset. But Nick accurately conveyed what I just said.
Okay. So Don, we're going to do community services, and then we'll let you know and you can make a call. So we'll be moving it up from 11 o'clock to current.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.